This last video on the brain is about hemispheric organization and also what happens when the connection between hemispheres is severed in patients that have epilepsy. The corpus callosum, you might remember, is the band of nerve fibers that connect the right and left hemispheres. It allows the hemispheres to talk to one another. There are sometimes cases of patients that have severe epilepsy where the corpus callosum is severed so as to not allow a seizure, the electrical activity from a seizure, to spread from one hemisphere to another, causing further damage. And we refer to these patients as split brain patients. It's important for you to understand the notion of contralateral control. Contralateral control means that the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body. So my left hemisphere controls the activity of my right hand. My right hemisphere controls the activity of my left hand. We're going to see a little bit more of this in a little bit. So in order for you to understand some of the unique experiences of split brain patients, particularly relative to when their visual fields are isolated, you have to understand a little bit how vision works. So if you were to split your eyeball down the center, it would be divided into both the right and left visual fields. Information from the right visual field is processed in the left hemisphere. Information in the left visual field is processed in the right hemisphere. So right visual field, you see it's projected onto the left side of each retina. That's the back of the eye, processed by the left visual cortex. And then the opposite, the left visual field. Okay, so there's that contralateral control relative to vision. In split brain patients that have undergone surgery to sever the connection between the hemispheres, we still have vision crossing over, because you could see that the visual pathways cross before the corpus callosum. So left visual field, right hemisphere, right visual field, left hemisphere. Again, important to understand. So here we have our split brain patient. This individual, remember, the right and left hemispheres cannot communicate with one another. So we're using a special instrument to separate their visual fields or isolate their visual fields called a tachistoscope. So this individual is seeing the word ring in the right visual field and the word key in the left visual field. He's not seeing the word key ring together because we've isolated the visual fields. So think about it. Which hemisphere of the brain sees the word key? It actually tells you right here. It's the right hemisphere. Left visual field, right hemisphere. The left hemisphere sees the word ring, because here we have the word ring, and we know that how vision works, that information is processed by the left hemisphere. Remember, the hemispheres can't communicate, so they're seeing independent of one another. Right hemisphere sees key, left hemisphere says ring, and there's no mechanism for them to be like, hey, key ring, like to tell each other what they've seen. So if I were to ask this individual what they saw, they would say the word ring. Ring, processed by the left hemisphere. And what did we learn about the left hemisphere? It's responsible for the language in 90% of us. So he says ring. However, if I were to ask him to pick up the object that he saw with his left hand, he'd pick up the key. The right hemisphere, contralateral control, is responsible for the left hand. What did the right hemisphere see? It saw the word key. Key goes to the right hemisphere, which controls the left hand, so he'd actually pick up the key with his left hand. Super interesting. Now, under normal circumstances, a split brain patient wouldn't see these types of kind of unique experiences, but in a situation where we're isolating the visual fields, that's where we would see something like this. So I have some practice for you to do with split brain patients in your notebook, and you're going to actually also watch a video about a split brain patient. And you're going to be introduced to Dr. Michael Gazzaniga. He and Roger Sperry are responsible for many of the studies done with split brain patients. And what we've learned from those studies, from that research, is really we've learned a lot about the functions of the right and the left hemisphere. Because in studying people whose hemispheres work independently of one another, they can conduct some really unique tests to give us some insights into each hemisphere's functions.